Hello, and thank you for joining me. I'm pleased to have you aboard. This video is an informational walkabout of the AirSim3D Citation C-560XL aircraft for X-Plane. My goal today is to give you a high-level overview of the jet so you know what you will get when you purchase it. The plan to accomplish this goal is to give you, quote-unquote, just the facts, instead of the usual opinion-laced third-party commentary, and I will show you all the little details that are often missed in these reviews while also sharing the inside story with you. We'll talk about context a lot and the reasons why we did things a certain way and what our design decisions were, so that in the end you can make an informed opinion and have an independent assessment of the aircraft for yourself. To accomplish these goals, we have designed two types of presentations for you: informationals and tutorials. Informations like this one are a broad show and tell of the aircraft features and functions. Tutorials, on the other hand, are short. They deal with a single topic and are focused on how to really do a process or procedure inside the aircraft. Our advice is to please try to review these presentations in their numbered order, because each one builds on what was shown or discussed in a previous one. There is a list of planned informationals and tutorials on our support site. This is the first in that series, and we will be producing and releasing them in that order. Okay, so here's what we'll cover in this informational. We will look at what ships with the aircraft, its detailed physical structures and features, nose to tail, over and under. You'll hear its F1 sounds, all of which were recorded from a real jet that we had access to and visit often at Seattle's Boeing airfield. Second, we'll also look at the custom three-dimensional bump map paneling and rivet work, and I'll show you why having 3D work is much better than seeing flat 2D painted lines that are often found in other products. Third, we'll then look at the aircraft's grunge artwork, and the emphasis here is on the word artwork. These are all those little oily streaks and greasy dirt found in places where it is expected, which all helps to make this aircraft look authentic and realistic. Real aircraft are not pristine, clean machines, and so our jet has a lot of shading and scratches and dirt and grime in all the expected places. And finally, number 4, we'll look at a key feature that really sets this jet apart: its lights and lighting system. And I'll show you why this is so special in this jet and how its night flying experience has been elevated to just a whole new level as a result of how lights have been implemented in this aircraft. And oh yes, we'll talk about something called shark lights. Really, that's what they're called. Okay, so there's lots to cover, so let's begin. Here we see the aircraft in its true cold and dark state with the door opened. And the first thing you'll probably notice are its external objects. You get a functioning baggage cart, a real-world replicated ground power unit which is fully integrated into the aircraft's electrical system, and the usual external elements like chocks and cones, instrument flags, and engine covers. Notice that the pilots are not in the aircraft yet, but once it makes sense that they should be in the cockpit, they will be there. You'll see them. And that's the first lesson. This aircraft is a 95% replica of the real jet, and it is 99% bug-free. We take that 95% replication very seriously, and we are very consistent when applying that high standard of realism everywhere and with everything in the jet. And since this is a 95% replica, it is in your interests, dear viewer, to invest some time to study and learn how to operate and fly it for many hours of bug-free enjoyment. To do that, we have provided a very detailed, on-demand pilot operation handbook on our website, and we'll cover how best to use it in a later tutorial. But once learned, this jet is not difficult to fly and operate, just like the real aircraft. And fair warning, if you are the type of person who likes to just jump in and start flipping switches and pushing things around and expecting them to work because that's how you are used to doing it without spending the time to learn how it operates, then folks, you are setting yourself up to be frustrated, I'm sorry to say, and you will think that there are bugs when in fact the aircraft is 99% bug-free. Everything is tested and works as it should. Take our word for it. It is truly pilot ready for hours of trouble-free flying. And since this is a study level aircraft, we strongly encourage you to take our 95% realism labels seriously. These informationals and tutorials are here to help you to get to that hours of trouble-free flying, and we recommend that you please watch them all in succession as they are released. So in summary, if you like deep, detailed system immersion that requires study to operate correctly, if you like to follow checklists and procedures that replicate what a real pilot does, if you like seeing 3D lights which will inspire you to do more night flying, if you like having very detailed object 3D modeling, low FPS bump mapping, and real-world animation everywhere, if you like hearing real recorded sounds for an immersive FMOD sound experience, if you want immersive and realism-governed systems and procedure integration, if you are looking for an aircraft that is 95% real-world replicated everywhere and is 99% bug-free, then this jet is designed for you. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about our realism-based liveries first. The aircraft ships with 12 professionally designed country-themed liveries. What does country-themed mean? Well, it means that each livery displays a set of design and registration markings in places on the aircraft that meet that country's naming and registration marking placement requirements. We've given each livery a name that we thought best reflects the country. This one is Canada Nice because it follows Canada's registration requirements, and notice the Canadian maple leaf on the tail. Why Canada Nice? Well, because Canadians are well known for being nice people. I know many Canadians, and I can attest to all of them being nice, and that to be completely true. All Canadian registered aircraft of this jet type begin their registration with C for Charlie, and therefore so does ours. This one is the Spanish Treasure theme, a gold, copper, and ruby livery that begins its registration with Echo Charlie as required by our aircraft type and by the Spanish aviation authorities. Here is our frosty, snowy Swiss snowstorm livery. That's a tongue twister. And the Swiss require registrations for our aircraft type to begin with Hotel Bravo. As you can see, the Swiss flag on the tail too. Here we see the Brazilian themed livery, greens and golds, appropriate for a sun-drenched country with its vast forests and long rivers. By the way, some countries require that aircraft registration markings also display on the underside of the wing, and the C-560XL does that too when required. Now, I'm not going to cycle through all 12 liveries now. We'll change liveries throughout this informational, so we do cover all 12 designs as we progress. And one last word on liveries. A community of 560XL fans has been using the included paint kit and are creating liveries by request on our support forums, which is on the .org site. So a huge thank you to them for their painting efforts. All right, let's start doing things in a more granular way and look at the baggage cart and GPU to begin with. I have something to show you that's really fun to watch with the baggage cart. When you open the baggage door, that automatically displays the cart. And something to know is that if something moves and is animated in the real jet, then it's very likely to happen in this jet too. As an example, let's load the bags onto the cart. To do that, watch this. You click the bags and if you see this at night, you will see that the hold is well lighted for night operations. At night, and this is true anywhere and everywhere in the aircraft, you'll see real 3D lighting from one of the over 300 real lights in this model. Something worth noting here. There are no traditional flat 2D light textures in this aircraft, the ones that are usually painted in Photoshop or GIMP. There are none in this aircraft. If the light source or the surface reflecting the light moves, then the lighting from that real 3D light will move and change too. This is a huge differentiator with this aircraft. All its lighting is real. there are no traditional flat 2D textures. And I'll show you more examples of lighting and shadows later on. Once finished, close the baggage door, or you will see a warning in the cockpit. Here we see the Indian summer themed livery with its deep shadows and golden sun streaks. You'll notice that in this state, Victor Tango has chocks and cones, instrument flags, and engine covers all over the aircraft. We refer to these in the Pilot Operations Handbook, or the POH, as the jet's external elements. These external elements are all displayed or removed automatically based on over 70 different aircraft states and scenarios at any given time. The logic here is not as simple as, well, let's pull on the parking brake and then we should expect to see chocks and cones displayed. Because, following up on my earlier comments about applying realism consistently, it's worth noticing here that the aircraft does not ship with a flight bag of menus that you can click to remove chocks, or to push back, or to open and close doors, or to connect GPUs and things like that, all while you are seated in the cockpit. This is not a bug. It is an intentional design decision we made to exclude those flashy menus often seen because it follows our rationale to be consistent with our 95% goal of keeping it real and as authentic as possible. Therefore, just like real 560 pilots, if you as the pilot want to open or close the main door, you will need to get up, out of your cockpit seat, go to the door, and open or lock it correctly. Then you'll need to learn how to do that with the steps you'll need to take to ensure a proper door seal, because all of that detail is authentically modeled in the door and pressurization functionality. It's the same thing if you want to stow bags. You'll need to go outside to the baggage door, open it, and do the work. Did someone use the lav? Well, real pilots make sure that the lav door is stowed open in preparation for takeoff. Verifying that it is in the correct state is in one of the 14 built-in checklists. So if the door is closed, you'll need to go to the door and stow it in the open position. If you miss that step, then one of the 47 upfront enunciators will light up for a no takeoff scenario. Do you need the GPU to charge the batteries? Then yes, being consistent with our 95% realism, you'll need to go outside, connect it, make sure it has enough fuel, start or stop it. You will also need to let the ground crew do their job and remove the chocks and cones when it's time for that to happen during aircraft operations. You asked for realism, you got it. The jet has many real things that you can do that real pilots or passengers do. Okay, so I know now what you might be thinking. Well, real pilots use tablets in the cockpit? Well, yes they do, but if we think that statement through to its logical conclusion, then actually, those types of devices are not included by the manufacturer when they first deliver the aircraft from the factory. Adding things like tabs and devices are individual choices that are made by real pilots, and so, again, applying our realism standard consistently, if you, the sim pilot, want tabs and add-on devices, then you get to make that aftermarket choice of adding them yourself, if you want to do that. There are plenty of great plugins in Explain to do that if you wish to add them to your cockpit. But if you do want to have a real 560XL experience, then the jet is set up to do the things the way real 560XL pilots do things. It's up to you. Let's switch liveries for the next section, and from the southern skies and New Zealand we have the white fern theme. The aircraft comes with a fully functioning, real-world replicated GPU complete with FMOD sounds. It can be seen when you open its small but authentically labeled connection point in the tail area that's found just behind the baggage door. The GPU function is fully integrated into the aircraft's electrical systems, and, like in the real world, it is capable of keeping batteries charged during layovers or can be used to recharge a depleted main battery when needed. As you can see, it has authentic labeling, and yes, their resolution is high enough for you to be able to actually read what each says. It has a glass-covered starting panel, again, all authentically labeled, and it and the emergency button to the right all function. Remember we said we try to build real-world authenticity everywhere and whenever possible? Well, the GPU is no exception. A fun and immersive part about the GPU experience in this C560XL is that if you try to start it when its fuel quantity is low, and you don't really know when that might happen, you will then see a steady blue light indicating low fuel level, and the GPU won't run. So what is this? If that happens, you will need to then wait until the ground crew refuels the unit. That usually takes about a minute, but once it's refueled, they will automatically start the unit for you, and then it functions as I described earlier. When started, the steady blue light will then change to a flashing orange light showing that the unit is running and is powering the jet's electrical systems. I'll cover GPU operations, conditions, and how it hooks into the aircraft's electrical systems in greater detail in the GPU tutorial. But for now, the takeaway is that this GPU is authentically modeled, uses real custom sounds, and is labeled, animated, and PBR textured so that this unit is not just a dumb start-stop object. No, we give you the real deal. The C560XL GPU delivers an authentic and integrated user immersion experience and realistic electrical GPU operations. Here we have the very stylish Italian country theme with the Italian flag on the tail and I for India registration markings as required by the ENAC, the Italian Civil Aviation Authority. Style from Italy? Why would we expect any less? And if we now turn our attention to the very important outside battery compartment that's just aft of the wing on the port side, this is basically where every real pilot starts and ends her or his day. And if you are starting or shutting the aircraft down in its cold and dark state, you will too. I cover cold and dark starts and the electrical system operations in our other detailed tutorials, but for now, if we get close up, notice the fully replicated compartment design and the grunge and grime typically found in this compartment. Notice the interior light switch to the left and the authentic battery design, markings, and colors. And if we zoom in super close, like the high-res GPU labeling we just looked at, which is really the same with all the labels found all over the jet, this battery's labeling too is high resolution. The disconnection and connection animation is also replicated, and when connected, main battery power is then available for normal jet operations. It is also lighted for night operations. Oh, and remember to close the battery door before climbing back into the cockpit or you will see a warning in the annunciator panel. Let's look at another livery, and this is the German country theme, the Pfeil or arrow design. Sure looks fast. Every real 560XL has three areas that display its characteristic high chrome unpainted areas. The wing leading edges, the engine leading edges, and the engine reverser buckets. These high chrome areas, along with the leading edges of the elevator and rudder, all contain fully functional and authentically timed anti-ice equipment. How those are operated are covered in the anti-icing tutorials. Just above the battery door are the all-important engines. Modeled after the PW545A engines, they provide our jet with a lot of power. There are the required probes in the front of the engine paneling and the rivets follow size and shapes of the real engine, and its fan blades are all accurately positioned, textured, and modeled. And check this highlight of the 560XL's engine modeling. Its blades are modeled to progressively get more blurred as the fans spin faster. Let's take a look at this quickly. There are 4 blade blur stages modeled. First, the blades when they are still. Here we see a low speed startup. We get to idle, and that's a slow blur. We get to the mid-range where it's progressively getting more blurred as the engine spins faster. And finally, a high-speed blur when the engines are at or near full power. The engines in the APU display individual heat plumes when operating, and the custom F-mod sounds you hear when they are operating are recorded from the real 560XLs. Notice that the sound changes as we move around the aircraft, or depending on where the throttle position is. Let's listen a bit. And there is distance and Doppler sound effects modeled too. Further, engine and APU sounds differ when you are inside the aircraft compared to when you are outside. Inside, they are muffled to map to the superior sound installation found in the real jet. As we drift to the outside to hear the change in sound, notice also a great example of one of the many authentically worded and placed labels that you will find all around the jet. Also check the in-out view of the cabin window warnings. You wanted realism? Well, you got it. Notice that the engine's paneling and rivets and vents are all three-dimensional. As I mentioned earlier, there are no flat 2D paint lines in this model. This is all done in 3D that changes with changing light. Even the size of the rivets modeling follows the real jet's dimensions. Notice that the ones in the leading edge are bigger. In truth, we actually went insane, to be sure, to match the actual count of the rivets to match the counts in the real jet. Here is an autopilot-controlled precision ILS approach and auto landing. There is more in our detailed how-to tutorials.
100.
The reversers, of course, are fully animated and functional and timed to open and close as they would operate realistically. Once they are open, notice the little grunge and dirt on the nozzle area and the space under the buckets when they are closed. We'll cover reverse operations from timing conditions in a later reverser operations focused tutorial. And for this section, let's change liveries. And this is the USA country themed livery, Singing the Blues, a nod to its rich blues music heritage. Let's shut the engines down for now and continue with the outside tour. It's a bit quieter that way. Moving on to the rear of the aircraft, we see the jet's empennage strakes. The back of the engine is also equally well textured and modeled. The strobe and rear nav light assembly has its own protective glass housing. And a bit further forward, notice a small black vertical line just ahead of the elevator leading edge. What is this? A paint bug, perhaps? No, those serve a real jet purpose and are authentically placed and modeled and serve a very important flight function. Like in the real jet, when you set flaps 1, the flaps move, but the flying elevator also slowly jack screws into a leading edge down position as it travels down the length of that little black line. Also, like in the real jet, this operation takes almost 23 seconds to complete, and it is the cause of the stab miscompare annunciator that indicates that the elevator position is out of alignment with the flaps 1 position during that period. By the way, looking at this line is also a key outside inspection walk-around item that the pilot checks prior to beginning jet operations. You wanted realism? Well, you got it. Moving further around to the other side, we see the APU intake and exhaust area. The intake is fully 3D modeled. Again, there are no flat 2D painted lines here. This means that you will actually see depth and shadows that will change with changing light conditions. As we saw earlier, the APU has its own heat bloom when it is running. Looking at the rudder and elevator some more, each panel placement and shape and all the riveting are all true to the real jet, and you can see some oil streaks at the hinges where you'd expect to see some dirt and grime. Let's now pull back and look at the fuselage with its distinctive underbelly bulge. It is this feature that allows passengers who are over 6 feet tall to easily walk upright in the cabin. And for this section, we turn to one of the two real-world liveries that ships with the aircraft. This is 56 Lima Papa. Notice the join area where the bulge extension meets the cabin. That's all modeled exactly to the width and the shape that's found on the real jet. Again, no flat 2D fake paint lines here. It's all 3D modeling. The paneling and all the aerials match the real jet's shapes, rivets, sizing, etc. As we continue the outside tour, by my count, this is the 11th of the 12 total liveries shipped. Here is another country-themed livery from the UK, the 3D red ribbon theme. Reds, blues, and whites. Very British. Turning to the wing a bit, this is one of the main design elements that drew us to build this aircraft in the first place. Its beautiful chrome-edged two-step wing planform. What a great design and a thing of beauty! The aircraft uses custom airfoils that governs its flight behavior, and this wing gives it a sweet ride in any weather. Don't miss the 26 little vortex generators on each wing, complete with grunge streaks, all modeled in fine 3D. Here we see the 3D stall strip on the leading edge near the wing root, and further out on the leading edge, the 11 boundary layer energizers, or BLEs. The wing design and its internal fuel tanks with crossfeed all work to give this jet its range, stability, and characteristic low stall and landing speeds. The jet has a highly effective speed brake. It's not a spoiler. And they are found on the upper and lower surfaces of each wing with their 3D modeled holes. Again, no flat painted 2D fake artwork here. By the way, getting the holes to be so clean looking in 3D object modeling is quite time consuming and tough, but we took the time to get it right. The speed brake and its hydraulic system has authentic dashboard enunciation and also custom modulated slipstream turbulence FWOD sounds, which can get quite loud or much softer depending on the jet's current airspeed for that added sense of flight immersion and experience realism. The emergency exit does not open, but when inside you can perform all the steps to open it right up to the part where you would actually open and remove the door. And all of that activates the required in-cockpit enunciation warnings. But we felt that taking that last step to open the door would be an unnecessary use of FPS and animation, and opening the hatch is very rarely done in real life anyway. It's quite expensive to put it back also, by the way. So, the experience is immersive, but it is not FPS expensive. For the same FPS saving reasons, the lav servicing panel that's found aft of the wing root and the fuel panel that's found forward of the wing root are also not modeled. However, fuel tanks, causes of fuel imbalance, fuel crossfeed, and all other fuel-related operations are all authentically modeled into cockpit and flight operations. And by the way, the real jet immersion experience also extends to when the APU has been running for some time, because the APU only draws its fuel from one side's fuel tanks, and this will cause the aircraft to become imbalanced. As PIC, you will then need to follow the correct cross-feed procedures to correct that no takeoff situation. Moving on, let's now take a look at the gear. And for that, let's do a takeoff. Don't worry, we'll cover takeoff in detail later in a how-to tutorial. But for now, just sit back and enjoy the ride, and I'll be back to look at the gear once we're in the air. It's just easier to look at them that way. By the way, for the eagle eyes out there, you may have noticed that the 560 seems to always track taxi or runway center lines in this informational. Well, this is not due to me being lucky, or even to say that this comes with a lot of practice. Actually, it's far simpler than that, and it's something that you as a pilot will be able to use to be on center from day one. So how does this work? Well, if you are in the default pilot position in the cockpit, then the front dashboard's design provides some very specific visual clues which you will use as your aircraft taxi and landing centering guide. Notice that all three gear are fully dampened and animated when on the ground to account for taxi and runway bumps for an authentic C-560 ground roll experience. We also have tire spin F-mod sounds when the roll gets up to higher speed. Notice that in the upcoming takeoff, by the way. We talk more about the cabin in a later detail-filled cabin informational, but as we taxi out, I just wanted to mention everything in the cabin works, and it's modeled and 3D textured and has real lights for that authentic C560 cabin experience. Shades work, tables fold out, and seats recline and have individual reading and table lights. Every label and placard is readable and placed where they ought to be. The lav is fully modeled and textured, and the cabin is sound insulated. All good to go. Here we are, ready for takeoff in the USA Blues livery. We are cleared for takeoff, checklist completed, clean board, no warnings, N1 target bug is set. So let's take off while you enjoy the ride. Brakes on, throttle up just a bit, watch the gauges, everything looks normal, okay. Here we go, brakes off, throttle up, easy to N1, maintain runway center, keeping ITT in the white. The aircraft does not need full power, we are not an airliner. What the? Oh, we have a port engine fire. Port engine fire. Okay, fly the aircraft first. Back off power. Speed brakes on. Begin braking. The rudder pedals use differential braking to help keep us on the center line as we continue to brake. Maintain center line. Okay, now let's pull the brake and deal with the fire. Master warning cancel. Fire button guard up, punch it. I see extinguisher bottles now armed. Punch it. Okay, fire extinguished. We can now cut the port side throttle. Okay, just let's turn a couple of things off. Fire alert guard down. Stow the reversers, port engine ignition, and the generator off. I'm now going to change the time of the day just so that we can see and notice all the custom egress emergency lighting we've built into the C560XL. Now at this time, we'd normally cut both throttles and turn our emergency lighting on. That turns the cockpit floods on and configures the cabin lights. Here is the day and night difference. Remember, those are all real lights and real reflections, no lit textures in this aircraft. The custom and authentic emergency lighting configuration turns the aisle strip lights on to point to both aircraft exits and configures the rest of the overheads and other cabin placard lights on as required. The door would then be opened quickly to evacuate the aircraft. But because we are in a sim, and since this is an aircraft information session and not an actual flight, we'll just get off the runway and continue on. Brakes off. Since we're on one engine, let's watch that asymmetric thrust using the rudder pedals, and let's go. Well, that was exciting. Okay, I sprung that engine fire failure on you just to demonstrate one of the many authentically modeled failures that the jet is capable of if you turn the sim's failures on. There are just a few other examples. So if you don't set the pressurization in the jet correctly, or if the door is not closed correctly, or if you have a seal leak, or the bleed air sources are down, you will black out if you are higher than 10,000 feet altitude. If you do not plan ahead for icing conditions, and that doesn't give the systems adequate time to heat up, you will ice up and drop out from the sky. If you lose both hydraulics with gear up, there is a very specific, realistic gear blowdown process to follow, and then other hydraulic systems like the speed brakes or the flaps will cease to also function. Or, if you lose main battery power for some reason, there is a fully functional emergency instrument cluster with a backup emergency battery. Try navigating and landing on this set of instruments at night in bad weather. I can tell you it gets very challenging and very stressful, but it can be done.
10.
I'll cover all of these and more failures in the topical tutorials, and this is also all detailed in the online POH, but for now, know that the system's failures are realistically modeled in the C-560XL. Alright, we got a bit sidetracked there, but I hope the information about the C-560XL's emergencies capabilities and the show and tell we just went through with you was informative and helped you understand the deeply immersive real-world experience possibilities in this 95% replicated jet. So now, let's get back to where we left off. We are back on the runway, ready for the takeoff, and as you can see, we are now using the second of our real-world liveries. And for this, we're going to, just let me move the chair out of the way so you can see better. We're going to change from the realistic to the augmented mode panel layout, because that gives us an auto throttle that we'll use in this next section, which actually the real aircraft does not have, but we added it as an on-demand convenience for pilots. Let's also turn the night instrument dimming switch off so we can see brighter instruments in the daytime. This is such a great real-world design feature in this aircraft. The jet is in good condition. Throttle up. No warnings. Brakes off. Here we go. And as we take off this time, let's turn our attention to the gears. Here comes our rotate, no warnings. Okay, rotate smoothly, nose up 10 degrees. Tap the brakes to stop the wheel spin. Normally we'd have gear up by this time, but leaving them down for this part of the informational. Throttle back to maintain egress speed. This aircraft is well powered, so you gotta watch that throttle. A lot just happened quite quickly here, but don't worry, takeoffs and landing steps are covered in the detailed how-to tutorials. Okay, 1000 AGL coming up. Autopilot on. Turning the auto throttle on, now setting it to 160 knots. Heading engaged. We see the jet turning. Check. And we're climbing normally. The auto throttle is holding the speed. Check. Everything looks good. Alright, so let's go outside and look at the gear more closely. About the gear. First, as we saw in our recent takeoff, the main gear's trailing edge shock absorber design dampens surface bounce for a nice smooth passenger ride. And of course, all three gears are individually textured. and they are all animated and timed so that they match the real jet's gear operations. The whole aircraft uses high-resolution textures and true PBR materials, and as I've mentioned before, there are no flat 2D paint textures with a bunch of fake shading anywhere. In our jet, we let light and physics create the materials, look and shadows and shading. This means that you will see real PBR materials depth caused by changing light angles for a given viewpoint. Said differently, you can expect the tires to look like real rubber material or the aluminum shocks to look and act like real aluminum. They are not just 2D painted to look shiny. This means that they will reflect the color and the angle of light as the light source change, like the sun or a rotating beacon from a service truck on the ground. And we spent a lot of time to really grunge them up with 3D techniques by giving them all their greasy grime and runway dirt and the splashes and the little oil streaks that we saw on the real jet. You'll find these scratches and occlusion shadows and grungy stuff all over the jet, even subtly on the window frame edges in the cockpit. On the steps of the main door because, well, steps are dirty as people walk on them. Or where pilots rest their feet in the pedals in the cockpit, those will get worn out. Or where the mic has worn the paint off the yoke column. Or where the seat cushioning has flattened after many butts and seats. That, by the way, is not low resolution imagery, but is where the cushioning has become smooth due to everyone sitting in it. Oh, and don't forget the sloppy Joe pilot last flying coffee stain that he left behind. These are the little things that we've tried to add realism because cockpits are not pristine and clean and they show wear and tear. Or from oil streaks of moving surface hinges. And there are lots and lots and lots of other places elsewhere in the jet where there is so much to see and it's yours to explore and discover. A great amount of care and time was spent to create this artwork because, like all machines, aircraft are not pristine, clean things, so our model is not showroom new. Anyway, we hope you like our grunge artwork to be found all over the aircraft. Next, let's turn our attention to something that's related to all this grunge artwork we just talked about. And that's about the superior bump-mapped artwork that you will find everywhere outside and inside this aircraft. Bump mapping. What is that and why is it so important to us? Well, for an object to look realistic, we've established that it also needs shading and dirt and panels and curves and lines and rivets. That's the grunge stuff that we just covered and showcased. Having these objects is one thing, but they also need depth. Depth creates the third dimension, and 3D bump mapping techniques provide that third dimensional depth. Now, traditionally, a 2D painting, something like the Mona Lisa as an example, will use contrasting paint to show depth, and aircraft designers will use paint programs like Photoshop or GIMP to do this also. We can see this 2D technique in the default MD-11 cockpit panel. Notice the vertical line in the center and the two screw heads to its right. See how they do not reflect light as the conditions change? They look flat and sort of work to fool the eye from a distance, but we felt that it did not meet our standards of making our aircraft functional and look real. Therefore, we chose to use only true three-dimensional lines and bumps, and as a consequence, we have no 2D object lit textures anywhere in the C-560XL. It's all real 3D bump artwork. Now, in visual terms, because we have 3D bumped curves and lines and bumpy grunge and panels and things like rivets, and this is the real important part, all of them change their color and lighted highlights as their angle to the sun changes, or when your viewing angle to them changes. In this way, they produce a real, deep, an enhanced three-dimensional and light affecting effect. This viewing angle dependent glint is not something you can replicate with 2D texture lit painting. A common use of 2D lit texturing is found when viewing underhood cockpit lighting, which notably we do not use. We don't use 2D lit textures for our cockpit lights, we use real 3D lights. And we'll showcase that much more in a minute when we discuss how we use only 3D lighting as well in the C560XL. Oh, by the way, another advantage is that the glint and sparkle from 3D bump artwork also absorbs and changes its color and brightness to reflect the changing time of the day. So that also adds to making them look very real. And that's what you'd expect to see in the real world too. Very lifelike. That's the effect we wanted. What this means in practical terms for your experience is that all our paneling and rivets and dirt and grunge and grime and wear and tear, they all have a real three-dimensional look and feel to them as the light changes as it moves across them. It goes without saying that for a first-time jet offering, this took a lot of trial and error to get right, but in the end we think it was worth it, and we feel it is a highlight for the C560XL visual immersion experience. We hope all this 3D grunge artwork, true PBR texturing, and superior bump mapping techniques we used sets us apart, looks very real, and appeals to you. So let's talk quickly about something you'll find most noticeable in the cockpit, and that's the C560XL's custom glass reflections. Now you'll often see options in aircraft to turn glass reflections off, which is highlighted as a great custom feature. Well, this has always been a chuckle factor for us, because what they're actually saying is, we acknowledge that you might find our reflections annoying and distractions, so we'll give you an option to turn them off. We want no part of that quote-unquote you remove our annoying reflections story. Instead, the C560XL has special custom glass reflections that we feel are quote-unquote done right, so that you don't and won't find them annoying or a distraction. Our custom glass reflections experience is noticeable but unobtrusive. In other words, you will see them, but they are not glaring white annoying reflections that you'd want to turn off. We therefore do not provide any options to turn our glass reflections off, but instead to rely on the custom work done to enhance the cockpit experience. Shouldn't that be the goal of any aircraft anyway? As examples, notice that as I pan around the cockpit, you will see glass reflections on all our instruments and the windshield glass, but once I stop moving, the reflections won't command your attention. You'll also notice that our reflections change their color based on the time of the day, and you'll also notice more of them when it's darker outside too. We wanted reflections, but crafted them in such a way that you would not need or want to turn them off. And that's just like the real thing. So in summary, the C560XL's custom glass reflections are not annoying, bright distractions. Instead, they are designed to be subtle, adapt to day-night conditions, and our goal was to enhance, not distract, from your cockpit experience. We hope you like them. The aircraft has many glass housings everywhere on the inside as well as the outside. Let's take a quick look at some outside examples. Glass covers all the external bulbs. Here are the wingtip houses. Here we see glass covering the wing inspection light housings in the fuselage, or the special strobe casing at the tail. Even the tail splash or recognition lights, as they are sometimes called, have their own individual glass housings. The main landing lights have real 3D crinkled glass covers. Those are not 2D paintings. The C560XL has custom pulse landing lights in addition to regular taxi and landing lights. But hold on, the pulse lights also are controlled by custom flight profiles and are TCAS enabled. The POH details the various states if you want to learn how they work, but there is more of that in the landing lights tutorial. And finally, maybe saving the best for last, the main thing to remember about all the lights everywhere in this aircraft, whether they are in the cockpit, the cabin, or outside, is that they are all real lights. There are no painted, non-directional, flat, 2D light spills or splashes anywhere in our jet. That's great for street lamp light pools as an example, but that's not what we did in our C-560XL. This jet has over 300, no joke, over 300 individually aimed, tuned, directed lights all over the inside and outside of the aircraft for what we believe to be the best night flying experience. If you see a light casting light or reflecting light too anywhere in our aircraft, those are real light beams and real intensity tuned reflections. Let that sink in for a second. We have no traditional 2D lit textures anywhere, real lights only everywhere. This is a key differentiator for our jet, and it's what gives us a spectacular night flying experience. We find ourselves flying more at night now in this aircraft than we have in other aircraft. You'll notice shadows change, reflections change, sometimes color and intensity will also change when the light experience is affected by the time of day and interaction with surrounding lights. Watch this example of how ITT temp lights interact with other lights in the engine display instruments to be able to cast color shadows that change when the lights change. You could never achieve this with 2D textures. Of course, we have all the nav and strobe lights needed, but the important thing here is to notice that they are all tuned and directional. Notice how they point in the direction they need to. Also notice how they flare if you look at them directly. Notice how the tail recognition light throws directional light splashes on the elevator and the cone of light on the tail. Here is the GPU lighting that casts its glow on the aircraft. What else? Oh, one last thing to show you before we wrap up. Compartments have lights in them too, like inside the battery box and the baggage cart. But here's the cool thing about using real lights. At night, you will see the interactive pools of light cast by those lights on sim surfaces. So for example, notice the pool of light on the tarmac flooding through an open door. You can never achieve this with 2D lit textures. And remember those shark lights I mentioned at the start? Those are special lights that shine downward and forward of the wing when the jet is set up for emergency egress. Real pilots jokingly call this the shark lights because, well, in a water landing, you will be able to see how many sharks are swimming around below the jet waiting for you to step off the jet. There's a bit of gallows humor there for me. These are the little things we took time to build, hopefully to provide you with an awesome and immersive C560XL experience. So thanks for watching. Please find links to the other resources in the description, and we'll see you again on another AirSim3D C560 informational or how-to tutorial. And so for now, as Paul Harvey used to say,
now you know the rest of the story.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Harvey. And for those watching, have a good day.